Okay, class. So for our next lesson on the present age, we'll pick up right where we left off, talking about a hero. I asked you in your last reflection, would this person who had an app on their iPhone that always allowed them to do the moral thing according to a principle, would that person be a moral hero for you? One of the things that Kierkegaard is interested in terms of addressing this problem of meaning is, what's the role of heroism generally? Not just somebody being a moral hero, but heroism in any branch of life, any endeavor. And he's interested here in the present age to talk about the effect that the age reflection has on our ability to be heroes, to be great, and to live great lives, but also our ability to even recognize heroes, our ability to admire people who are great and who have accomplished something that is great. So he tells this primarily through this somewhat strange little story about the jewel on the ice. And I'll read that in different parts here. So this begins on page 8. He says, if the jewel which everyone desired to possess lay far out on a frozen lake, where the ice was very thin, watched over by the danger of death, while closer in the ice was perfectly safe, then in a passionate age the crowds would applaud the courage of the man who ventured out. They would tremble with him and for him and with him in the danger of his decisive action. They would grieve over him if he were drowned. They would make a god of him if he secured the prize. So let's begin trying to understand that. So to begin with, this jewel out on the ice, it's meant to simply be a stand-in for anything worthwhile, anything great, anything that really is valuable in human life, right? And the idea is those things are difficult to get. Those things require decisive action, and they require some degree of risk, right? So he says, in a passionate age, if this thing were out there on the ice, then we would watch and somebody would go out and they would risk their life to try to get that jewel, right? And if they got the jewel, we would applaud for them. And we would even applaud their decisive action in trying to get the jewel. And if they tried and failed and fell through the thin ice and died, then we would grieve over them. But if they got it, then we would love them, right? We would applaud them as a real, genuine hero. We would look up to them and would be inspired by them. In contrast, he says, in the age of reflection, we deal with those things that are greatly valuable very differently. He says, but in an age without passion, in a reflective age, it would be otherwise. People would think each other clever in agreeing that it was unreasonable and not even worthwhile to venture so far out. And in this way, they would transform daring and enthusiasm into a feat of skill, so as to do something, for, after all, something must be done. The crowds would go out and watch from a safe place, and with the eyes of connoisseurs appraise the accomplished skater who could skate almost to the very edge, i.e. as far as the ice was still safe and the danger had not yet begun, and then turn back. Right? So he says, in a reflective age, it seems instead we think, look, great things. Oh, what's great? Right? Let's just settle for a kind of show. Right? Let's settle for entertainment. Right? Where, yeah, that jewel, that thing everybody wants, that's just going to stay out there. But instead, we're going to admire that person who seems to be trying to get it, right? And, they're never going to skate all the way so far as the ice is thin, right? But what we're going to admire is maybe they do some cool skating moves, right? And they do some cool skating moves, and then they come back, and we all applaud, right? He says, in a reflective age, because we don't have that passion and that commitment, we're not willing to take the risks, right? In fact, it seems clever for us to not take the risk. We say, yeah, who would risk their life for such a thing, right? Instead, let's all live this kind of comfortable existence where we put on a show, right? We are entertained. There's momentary enthusiasm and publicity and hype, right? So we never accomplish that great thing. We never attain that great thing that the jewel represents, but maybe that's okay. So that's the story of the jewel on the ice and this comparison between these two skaters. The passionate skater who risks themselves, is committed to getting that or to die trying, and a reflective skater who knows that that's a little bit silly and that it's better just to put on a show to entertain people. But really, Kierkegaard's main interest in telling the story of the jewel on the ice is not to talk about the skaters, but rather to talk about the audience, the people who are admiring these two skaters. And he wants to draw this contrast between the way that we admire and uphold a hero in a passionate age and the way that we admire and uphold a hero in an age of reflection. Okay, so let's look at what he says. He talks about how afterwards, after the skaters have gone out, there's going to be a banquet. There's going to be some sort of celebration in which we show our admiration. Okay, so this is on the next page, on page 9. He says, now the proper relation between the admirer and the object of admiration, that's the hero, is one in which the admirer is edified by the thought that he's a man like the hero, humbled by the thought that he's incapable of such great actions, yet morally encouraged to emulate him according to his powers. So let's pause there and talk about what Kierkegaard is saying is the proper form of admiration. This is what he thinks is the correct way of admiring a hero. And I'll break it down for you. So to begin with, he says, we should be edified by the thought that he's a man like me, right? It changes to human. Right? What does it mean to be edified? Literally, this means to build up, as in an edifice. The idea is we will kind of be built up in ourselves, feel stronger because we think, that is amazing what human beings can accomplish. Right? And since I'm a human being, I'm amazed to see what humanity can accomplish. If you have that passion and that commitment, it's amazing what human beings can do. So that's the first step, is through that kind of bond of common humanity, for me to feel edified and stronger at this example of somebody who's done something great. The second step is to be humbled. He says you need to be humbled by the thought that you can't do that, or at least you can't do it yet. Right? You have to be able to admit that there is this gap, this difference, this what he calls a qualitative gap. There's a gap of quality between what this hero is doing and what you're capable of doing. Right? And Kierkegaard thinks it's essential that you be humbled by that, and you accept that there is that qualitative gap between where you are and where your hero is. But the next step is equally important. He says, although you're humbled, on the other hand, you're morally encouraged to emulate the hero according to your own powers. Right? So whatever kind of hero it is, it might not be that I can go and do that thing, but I can do what I can in my own life. Right? I have my own ability to go out and do great things. So let's take it back to some of the examples of heroes that I've talked about. Right? Isaac Newton, for example. I'm never going to be Isaac Newton. Right? You're never going to be Isaac Newton. But does that mean that it ends there? No. The fact is, you can also go out and do great things. Right? So it's important in Kierkegaard's mind, it's important for you to begin by saying, look, it's amazing what people like Isaac Newton can do, discovering the eternal laws of physics. Right? It is humbling to think about how great a mind Isaac Newton is. Right? And the fact is that probably none of us listening to this video have accomplished something that great yet. On the other hand, it's important for us to be able to relate to those heroes and to be inspired by them, what he's called morally encouraged by them, to go out and do something great in your own life. Kierkegaard thinks each individual has that potential to attain greatness and to live a meaningful and great life, if you so will it, if you commit yourself to it, if you have that kind of passion. Right? And he thinks, in a way, it's our heroes, it's holding our heroes in that proper relation that allows us to do that. So let's talk about that side of it. Kierkegaard thinks, if I have heroes that I'm edified by, humbled by, and morally encouraged by, right, then I can relate to that person as somebody who I can say, I'm going to go out and try to do something that great myself. I'm not there yet, but I will be. I'm going to put in that time and that effort, and I'm going to have that level of commitment that's going to allow me to do something great in my own life. Right? And as we indicated in the last lesson, Kierkegaard thinks it's when you have that sort of passion and commitment to doing something great and noble and worthwhile in your own life, that is how life becomes meaningful, right? But as we talked about, that's the kind of thing, each person has to find their own form of greatness, right? Their own form of heroism, right? But Kierkegaard thinks that is available to each person, right? And it doesn't matter whether you're a famous hero, right? Or you've simply done something great in your own private life. Right? You simply lived a high-quality life by whatever standards you have for yourself. But the point is, you need heroes. You need people who can inspire you, and you need to be able to relate to them in the right way. In contrast, Kierkegaard thinks that in an age of reflection, we've lost all of that. We've lost the ability to admire heroes in the correct way. And as a result, we've lost the ability to become heroes ourselves in our own lives. So that's the next thing to try to explain. And so then I'll continue the quote there. He says, but where intelligence has got the upper hand, the character of admiration is completely altered. Even at the height of the banquet, when the applaud is loudest, the admiring guests would all have a shrewd notion that the action of the man who was receiving all the honor was really not so extraordinary, and that only by chance was the gathering for him, since after all, with a little practice, everyone could have done as much. Briefly, instead of being strengthened in their discernment and encouraged to do good, the guest would probably go home with an even stronger predisposition to the most dangerous, if also the most respectable of all diseases, to admire in public what is considered unimportant in private, since everything is made into a joke. So let's try to break that down. So he says, in an age of reflection, although we're all there at the banquet and we're all applauding, we're all taking part in this kind of hype. In our own minds, we're all thinking, this guy's not so great. Yeah, I mean, he had some cool moves out there, but, I could have done just as much. If I wanted to skate out on the ice, I could have done some cool moves. So yeah, I'm applauding, I'm taking part of the hype, but deep down I know it's not that big of a deal, what this guy did. Right? And he says, what they have is this kind of what he calls a dangerous disease, right? The kind of thing that can rob our lives of meaning, and that is to pretend to hold something as important publicly, to applaud for it, while privately you're thinking in your own mind, this is not that important. That can seem clever, right? It's a form of kind of cynicism where, I grudgingly perhaps admit that this person deserves some applause, but inwardly I think, it's no big deal. I could have done that. Kierkegaard thinks, why is this so dangerous? It transforms everything into a joke. Let's talk about what that means. Right? If I'm pretending that something is great, but I have the cynical view that actually it's not so great, then greatness itself becomes a kind of joke, right? It's a kind of thing, this person's great, that person's great. Who cares, right, is my attitude, right? Well, on one hand, it seems like I now have a kind of leg up, because that person who I might otherwise admire, and especially this is the part that's being avoided, the sense of humility, the sense of being humbled by heroes. In the reflective age, I don't need to deal with that. Right? I don't have to deal with the fact that I haven't yet done something as great in my life as this person that I admire, right? And that can be very comforting, right? There's this kind of complacency that I can get to when I think, it's really not that big of a deal what these so-called heroes are doing. My life's okay too. So I'm not a skater. I'm no Isaac Newton, but I'm okay. What's the big deal? Isaac Newton, he did some smart stuff. But it's not that big of a deal. Right? Kierkegaard thinks, that is comforting to you in the most immediate sense, but think about what is lost. If you don't have that ability to be humbled by a hero and have that sense of a gap between where you are and where they are, then you lose that ability to be inspired to go out and do something great for yourself. And if I have the inward sense that even things that are called great are not great, I eventually reach a place where I feel like nothing is great. Right? There's just hype, right, which is all ultimately empty, and so nothing is great. And another way of expressing that is everything becomes a joke, right? Or we might say everything becomes meaningless, right? There's people who are applauded, but that's not any really better than people who aren't applauded, so everything's a joke. There aren't really any heroes, right? And as much as that might be comforting to you, Kierkegaard thinks that cynical position is robbing life of meaning. Because if I can't be inspired to go out and be a hero, if I can't be humbled by heroes, and if I have no sense that I need to be greater, then I just relapse into a sort of mediocrity, where I cleverly convince myself that being mediocre is basically the same thing as being great. What's the big deal? Right? As much as that's comforting, on the other hand, that robs my life of meaning. Because if I am not inspired to go out and do something great, if I don't even recognize that, right, that possibility of greatness, right, then I look around and I think, everything's mediocre. Everything's, no one thing is greater than anything else. There are things. That is the recipe for a meaningless existence, if you can't admire anything as great. And one way he describes it later on in this book is he talks about leveling, right? And I'll try to explain this term leveling. If you have the proper form of admiration, he thinks you sense this gap between where you are and where the hero is, right? And as we just talked about, that gap is necessary for inspiration. It's necessary for meaning. Right, I have to have that sense. Right now, it might be that sense then inspires me to improve my level of excellence till I reach that, right, or maybe even farther. I might surpass my heroes in life, right, if I'm inspired by them. Right, this happens all the time, right, but it happened precisely because I began with that sense of a gap. In contrast, Kierkegaard thinks in an age of reflection, we have what's instead a kind of leveling, where we want to pull our heroes down to our own level, such that my hero is really no better off than I am. Right? I see my hero, right, as just another person on my level. Right? And they're not really a hero. That's why I'll put that in quotes. Right? Yeah, they skated around for a little bit. I could have skated around. What's the big deal? Right? Kierkegaard thinks if you try to level or pull down everything to where you are, if you don't recognize that gap of greatness, then you lapse into a kind of complacency and a kind of mediocrity, where now it seems like nothing is great, nothing is inspiring to you. Moreover, what Kierkegaard worries about is this kind of self-reinforcing cycle where the more leveling there is, the more we try to tear down our heroes and make them merely equal to us, the less we're able to have heroes. And eventually it could be the case that people aren't doing great things anymore, right? If everybody's relapsing into this kind of comfortable, complacent mediocrity, right, then I look around and there aren't any heroes to inspire me, and so I don't even need to tear them down anymore. We are all, in fact, leveled, right? And then we have a situation where nobody's inspired to do anything great, right? And Kierkegaard thinks this is endemic in the modern world. We tend to look at people who are set up to be great, and we want to pull them down. We do not want to be humbled by them. We don't want to recognize that qualitative gap between what they've accomplished and what we've accomplished. It's much more comfortable to have leveling. But the side effect of leveling is an absence of inspiration, an absence of heroes, and thereby an absence of meaning. I'll give you an example of this. Here in Boston on Patriots Day, there's always a marathon, right? And the way it works is people who are watching the marathon, you'll typically go to a marathon party and you start drinking beer at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and you sit out on your lawn chair lining the marathon route, and you watch the marathon runners go by and you cheer. Every marathon party I've gone to, the conversation always turns to people's exercise routines and their running routines, and almost inevitably there's more than one person who kind of hints that, they could be running the marathon. They're not, but they could be, right? And it's hard, it's difficult, but they could also be running if they wanted to. And I always think back to Kierkegaard in the present age, and I think, you're talking as if this person who's running the marathon, that you're kind of equal to them, but think about it, right? They're running 26 miles. You're sitting in a lawn chair drinking a beer at 8 o'clock in the morning. There's an enormous gap between you, right? You're simply reflectively trying to remove this gap of greatness, but that gap is real, right? But if you can't recognize that gap, then you can't be inspired by those people who are doing something so difficult, right? So challenging, so inspiring. And so you lose the ability to be inspired by it, and it all seems kind of like a joke. Okay, so for your reflection, what I want you to do is ask yourself, do you agree with Kierkegaard that our age has this problem where we tear down our heroes and we experience leveling, right? Where we don't want to be inspired by heroes. We don't want to deal with this humbling effect, right? Or do you disagree? Do you think that, no, in fact, there are still a lot of cases where people admire great heroes, are inspired by them, and then go out and do something great? And what I want you to do in either case is at least name one example that you can think of, right? Whether you agree with Kierkegaard or you disagree, or maybe you find some nuanced position in the middle, I want you to write about at least one example where you could see this happening or failing to happen.